Lord, cure us of our addiction, waiting for the next season of life to think we're good enough, waiting for the next number on the scale to say we're okay enough, waiting for the next dream, the next house, the next step up. The next bend in the road that finally makes us feel we've arrived at contentment. Forgive us, Lord, for our waiting room addiction. Addicted to always thinking we're in a waiting room. Counting down the days till we enter real life, when real life is happening right now. And you are the one waiting for us to give you thanks for the miracle of now. Wake us up out of our waiting room addiction.
I'm 25 days thankful for our baby's laughter.
I'm 15 days thankful that who I am is enough.
And cure us with thanksgiving.
I'm 3 months thankful for where I'm living right now.
I'm 45 days thankful for my life now.
Show us how we have room in our lives to give you thanks right now.
I'm 3 weeks thankful that I have a job to provide for my family.
I'm 1 day thankful for the gift of now.
So I'm looking for a new worship leader this morning, if anyone feels interested. I just fired Seth after that comment. So if you're interested and you can at least carry kind of a tune, we're looking for a new worship leader. You have the next maybe 30 minutes to apply at the back. So let's be honest. I mean, they played really good. Texas Tech played really good last night. So let's be grateful for that, you know? A couple of quick things this morning, just to lift your spirits up. If at some point this morning you would like to get one of these, it says, "Oh, you of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Because they were afraid yesterday, let's face it. This is our game day shirt from a couple of years ago, and we have a plethora of these, and we want to give them away to you this morning. If you'll stick around right after church, we're going to have lunch right down the hall here, Cane's Chicken. We're going to do it right this morning. And, we're entering this time of the year. I don't know about you, but with me, I am just kind of ready for Thanksgiving, ready for a break, ready to go home and see my family. And so I think you're probably there too. I think a lot of us during this time of the semester, we're ready for a break. And I don't know about you, but I'm definitely ready for that. But as we enter into this time of Thanksgiving, I feel the need to refocus on the things that really matter the most to us. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I get caught up in the mindset of what's next, the next step, what's beyond college for you, what's beyond this first step in career for you, what's beyond that, what's beyond that, what's beyond that. And a lot of times we lose focus of the here and now, what God has called you to right here, right now, these people that He has in your life. Who is He calling you to? What is He called you to? What is He given you the responsibility this morning? Where has He called you to be faithful, and are you doing that? This morning, we're picking up our study in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. We're in chapter 11 this morning, and as we begin our thought on being faithful, being found faithful, I just want you to bear in mind that God has called you to something. He's not called you to the next step yet, okay? I've talked to a lot of upperclassmen, a lot of seniors, and they're constantly telling me, man, my mind is on this, or my mind is on this, and I'm ready for that next step. But we got to take a step back, because until God has removed you from this place physically, your calling is here. A lot of you talk to me about wanting to go on missions, or wanting to be a missionary full term, or be in ministry full term, and the reality is God has not called you to that yet. He's called you here, and so He expects you to be all in here until He removes your burden here and moves you on. As a college minister, I'm so thankful that I get to do life with you. I mean, I don't have friends, a lot of friends my own age, because I spend most of my time with you. And I consider most of you family. Even if you don't know me and I don't know you yet, we're going to work on that. But I consider this congregation, this church, to be my family. And I mean that. And so it's a blessing for me to get to see how God is using you here, how he's going to move you on out of this city someday, potentially, maybe to another state or to another city, maybe even to another country. And it's such a joy as I look back over the thousands of students that have come through our ministry in the past. It's so encouraging for me to keep up with them on Facebook and see where they're at and how God is using them, how God is using them in the influence in the lives of other people. And I can't wait to say that about you someday. Can't wait to check up on you in a few years and see where you're at. But until that point, you're called here. You're called to school first and foremost. I mean, that's why you're here, right? I mean, I don't want to say first, because at first you really need to work on your relationship with the Lord. But that's up there in your priorities, school. And so, as we enter into this time of Thanksgiving, and next week we'll meet one more time before Thanksgiving, we're going to talk through chapter 11 this week and next week, and then we'll take a break. We'll have a Sunday off, and we'll meet at our South Campus. We won't be meeting here in 2 weeks. We'll meet at our South Campus at 98th in Indiana, and we want to worship with our South Campus family there for that Sunday right after Thanksgiving. So if you're in town, please join us. We'll go out to eat afterwards or do something fun afterwards. Just try to stick around if you can and find us after the service down there. So, having said that, let's backtrack into chapter 10 real quickly, just so we have an understanding of what chapter 11 is dealing with. It's so important as we study the scriptures to go back maybe a chapter or two sometimes to see the context of where this scripture that we're studying is leading us. And as we come to the scripture this morning, the chapter 11, this is a famous chapter in Hebrews. It's called the Hall of Fame Faith, or those that have lived by faith, the Hall of Fame chapter of Hebrews. Now, there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. The author of Hebrews is calling these Hebrew people who have trusted Jesus, who have kind of been backsliding into their old ways, their old faith. He's calling them to look at their previous predecessors, the forerunners to the gospel, the predecessors of the Old Testament, and to see where God is leading them even now and how God is continuing the story. And he's encouraging the readers of Hebrews to live out their faith well. Now check this out. In chapter 10, verse 32, the author of Hebrews says this: remember those earlier days. He's talking to these people specifically that received this letter. It says, remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you stood your ground in the great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had a better and lasting possession. He's talking about the possession, the better and lasting, the one that is abiding in heaven. This place is not our home. Thank God this place is not our home. In this place, in this world, on this planet, there is death, there is suffering, there are bad things going on all around the world. You just need to turn on the news and watch. In fact, just recently I read about this morning, they have, ISIS has released another video of another beheading. And I think it's so easy for us to get so callous to that and go, well, that's just another life that's lost, that's just another beheading. But these things have been going on for thousands of years. The church has been persecuted like this from the beginning of its creation. And sometimes we in America are so blind and so removed from those things, that type of persecution, we don't often know what it means to suffer for the gospel. And I don't know about you, but man, when I read those stories, it just fires me up, because I'm like, man, hopefully these people, these Christians, our brothers and sisters in Iraq and Syria, they're standing in their faith firm. I hope that if that time ever comes for me, I would be able to stand my ground and say, take my life, I don't care. Take my stuff, I don't care. Take my family, I care about them. But there's a greater and lasting possession. There's a greater and abiding possession that's not of this world, and it's in heaven. That's my hope. And this is the hope that the author of Hebrews has for these people that are reading this. He says, remember the earlier days when you were all in, when you didn't care what people said about you. You didn't care what they talked about in the marketplaces. You didn't care if they took your property. In fact, you considered that joy when that happened. And my mind goes to Paul. Remember Paul when he was in Philippi and he was preaching the gospel, and he turns around because this girl was annoying him because she was possessed by an evil spirit. And he turns around and casts the demon out. And this girl had been predicting the future for her owners. She was a slave girl, and she made a profit for her owners by foretelling the future. And now that this spirit of divination, meaning a spirit of a python, now that it's left her, I don't know what that means. I know it's satanic. Even though this evil satanic spirit has left her, there's joy, there's freedom, but now her owners of the slave girl go to the marketplace or go to the authorities, and they say, these two men are preaching about Jesus. You need to have them flogged. You need to have them put in prison. And so Paul and Silas are flogged within an inch of their life, perhaps. Flogging is a very harsh punishment. It's a whipping. It's a beating beyond what you and I would ever think about enduring. But they were flogged and they were beat and they were put in a prison in the inner cell, in the inner prison where all the sewage came down into. This was not a good place. And they were chained to the walls. They're probably hurting. They're probably frustrated. They're probably cold. They're probably scared a little bit, or at least I would be. But as we read in Acts chapter 16, man, they start worshiping God. They start giving thanks to God for being like Jesus, for taking up that call to suffer like Jesus. And wouldn't you know what happened next? God comes down and he opens the cell doors through an earthquake, and the chains fall off them, and you can read the rest of the story, but it's just in that mindset of that suffering. What does that look like? I think we as Americans sometimes are so far removed that we don't really understand. We don't really comprehend what it means to suffer for the gospel. Suffering for us may look differently. It may look like we lose some friends or some family members. It may look like we're humiliated in front of a classroom. Is that worth it to you? Is that worth it to you to suffer? Because I remember the first moment when it all made sense to me, when I became a believer. I was very young. I didn't know what it meant to suffer. I didn't understand what Jesus was calling me to. I knew I needed Jesus. I knew without Jesus I would be forever, eternally separated from God. I didn't want that. It scared me to think about suffering in hell for eternity. But as I began to grow in my faith, as I began to learn things, as I began to read Scripture and being taught and poured into by other people, as people began to invest in me, I began to see that we are called to be separate from this world, to not walk in its path, but to take a path that is outside of that path, to walk like Jesus did, to talk like Jesus did, to become like Him, to serve like Jesus did. And I'm so thankful that you guys have gotten that. Most of you have understood the call in your life. You've actually gone out and you've served. Yesterday we had Express Care Church here in this place. We had, probably 200 people that are in need, that are at the lower income levels of our city, and they sat here in this audience yesterday, and we had a church service here. We do that every month right here in this room. And then we fed them a Thanksgiving dinner over here. And a lot of our college students were serving in the serving line over here. They were serving the plates. It was so cool. You guys get it. You guys understand it. But it's time to refocus, because sometimes I think we get so far in this peripheral view of where God is calling us. We have all these different things that we have yet awaiting us, all these different things that we have to accomplish or do with this semester, all the things that God is calling us to in the future, and sometimes we overshoot what God is calling us to now. So I want us to refocus this morning and think about the calling that God has in your life. You guys get it. You're serving like Jesus. Your faith is becoming stronger. You want that. You need that. I need that. I'd invite you to serve with us next month. We're going to have another opportunity for that. We do a lot of stuff like that. If you need more information, please email us or talk to us at the back after the service. But as we enter into chapter 11, this is the mindset that the author has. This is the mindset that the people of the readers of this book have. It's. Do you remember your former things? Do you remember the ways that when you came to Jesus, you were so on fire for God, you were so on fire for Jesus, you didn't care what they took. You didn't care if they took your life. This is the mindset that we enter into chapter 11 with, and we studied this part last week. And it says in chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for, and certain of what we do not see. Let me read it to you this way. Here's another translation. Now, faith is the assurance or the substance of things hoped for, the conviction or the evidence of things not seen. In other words, the knowledge or assurance of chapter 10, what we just read, the knowledge and assurance of, I don't care if you take everything. I have such a strong faith. I don't care if you take everything. Take my life, because I see beyond this life into an everlasting one that is abiding, a home that is not of this planet. This place is not my home. There is a greater place. There is a greater comfort. There is a greater love beyond this life. I don't care what you do with this life. Take it. There's a greater and abiding possession, one that is lasting, eternal, and it is in heaven. This is the faith. This is the knowledge or assurance. They knew they had a better possession and an abiding one. This is called faith. And a whole chapter of living examples of radicalizing faith is about to be given. And we're about to step into all these people who walked out their lives in faith. You can know you're on the right track by remembering Hebrews chapter 6, verse 11. Let me read this to you. Here's a translation, the English Standard Version. It says, we desire that each one of you, Hebrews 6:11 says, we desire that each one of you show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope until the end, that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised. Did you catch that? He says, we want each of you to show the same diligence that you did at first, so that through these trials, through these difficult times, you can inherit what has been promised. What has been promised to us? That's the real question. Yes, eternal life, that's true. Yes, death is not the end. Yes, this is the hope in which we were saved, that death, after death, it is not the end. There is something greater beyond this. Yes, those are the things that we were saved in. This is the hope in which we were saved in. But there's a greater thing beyond this, and this is what he gets to. This is the whole theme of Hebrews. There is a greater and lasting inheritance in the kingdom. Did you know you have an inheritance as a child of God? And I'm not just talking about salvation. This is not dealing with just salvation. This is talking about an amazing inheritance in the kingdom. Our Father is so good to us. I mean, it just blows my mind. When I think about how much I love my children, when I think about I would do anything to save them, anything, I would go to the farthest reaches of the world to save them. I would do anything. I would give up my own life to save them. And man, I love it when they love me. Man, I love it when they run to me and they hug me. And I know it's genuine. I know it's genuine when they just wrap their arms around me and squeeze so tight. You feel it, and you can just feel it. There's other times when like Avery, my 7-year-old, is mad at me or something. And, she doesn't want to look at me. She doesn't want to make eye contact with me. And when she hugs, it's more like this. And I feel it. But our God is so good. He's such a good Father. And He knows when you're mad at Him. He knows when you're beat down. He knows when you feel worthless. If you came into this room this morning, you feel beat up, or you feel scattered spiritually, or maybe you feel unworthy, God's not okay with that. He loves you. And He loves you like a good father does. I don't know if maybe you didn't have a good father. But He knows where you're hurting. He knows where you're lacking in faith. He knows where your strengths are. And He wants to just wrap His arms around you this morning. I feel like at this point in the semester, it's this time of the year, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get this feeling from you guys that you're just barely hanging on. God knows that. He knows that. And He loves you, and He's patient with you, and He's forgiving. And so this morning, if you hear anything, just hear this, that He loves you. Ever feel unloved? Ever feel unwanted? He's not okay with that. He wants to love you. He wants to wrap His arms around you. And he desires that you do the same, that you wrap your arms around him and that you listen to him and that you listen carefully to what he says. Last night I had a hard talk with Avery, my 7-year-old, and man, it just broke my heart. I mean, some of the things we talked about. And she's got such a gentle spirit, and I see it. And sometimes I come down on her probably a little too hard. You know, she's the oldest, and so we expect a lot out of her. But yesterday I was just reminded, last night as we're having this conversation with her, I'm just reminded how much she wants to please me, you know, and she looks to me and she wants to please me so much. And I love that about her. I love that about her, that she listens to me. She looks at my facial expressions. She hears my voice. She hears the tone. She hears when it's raised. She hears when it's frustrated with her. She takes all those things to heart. She's listening. And the reason I'm telling you about this, I didn't mean to talk about this, but I feel sometimes we are so sometimes dull of hearing because we think God may be so harsh. I mean, for example, my wife, you know, her view of God is that he's a little bit harsher than I feel like what he really is. And I think a lot of that comes from our parents. You know, I think studies have shown that our view of God is definitely affected by our view of how we view our Father. You know, and so my father's very loving, very, very patient. He can get mad sometimes. It's so important as I think about this, as I father, as I parent my children, and someday you men will be fathers, your children will look to you. And what you do and how you do things, how you say things, how you discipline, how you treat them is how they're going to view God. That's kind of scary. A lot of you guys are far away from that. Let's not talk about that this morning. But here's the point of Hebrews 11. That we would be imitators of those who through faith and patience will inherit these promises. The promises that you and I have, the promises that we have as children of God is not just the opposite of hell. It's not just heaven for eternity. There is so much more to heaven than what you and I even probably realize. There's places to serve with Jesus. There's rewards in heaven. We read, and we'll read through this today. There's rewards for those that are faithful, that are pursuing Jesus, that are continually listening to the Lord and saying, God, what do you want me to do? Because that's all that matters to me. God, you are all that matters to me right now. That's where I want to be. That's where I want you guys to be too. To just go, God, where do you want me? Where have you called me to right here, right now? Listen to this. Faith is being sure of what we hope for, certain for what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. The Old Testament saints. Verse 3 says, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's hand, at God's command, and so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended by a righteous man. He was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God has taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. I love this verse here. I love this verse because it takes me back to square one with God. What is faith? Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. I've never seen God. I've never seen heaven. I've never seen anything about God except for what I've read about in the scriptures. I know I've felt him on the inside. I know that he has moved in my life and there's no other way to explain it. I've seen different things and how the Lord has moved in my life, but I've never actually physically heard God's voice. I've never actually seen God move at all. I mean, literally, physically see God. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain for what we do not see. Yes, I have faith. You have faith. It may be in different things, but you and I both have faith that we believe certain things are true, even if we can't see them or explain them. But it's what you do with that faith that really matters. Is your faith living in action? Is your faith living and active, or is it worthless? Like James says, is it a worthless and dead faith, not doing anything? What are you doing with your faith? I don't know about you, but I feel like a sense of obligation sometimes to just be all in with God sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like he gave everything for me. And when I take that in, especially around Easter, when I fully see what Jesus did and what he has done for me on the cross and the price that God paid for him, I feel a sense of obligation to do with my faith what he has called me to do. To listen to God's voice and to go, God, I just want to please you. I don't care about men. And sometimes I drift back into that mindset of, well, I need to hear from men now. I need to be reassured from men's perspective, man's perspective. And sometimes I lose my focus. This morning, the focus is we need to come back to God. We need to listen to what he's saying because he's a good God and he's a loving God. Listen to this. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice. By faith, Abel would take the very best of his flock, the very best of his sheep or lambs or whatever, and he would offer them up to God. And I think sometimes we don't really understand what that really looks like because we're so far removed from offerings like that. But take this into account. What if God asked you to give something of great value? Maybe it's your entire paycheck for this past month. What if he asked you to do that? What if he said, I want you to give this to the homeless as an offering to me? I want you to give this to a church plant as an offering to me. I want you to give this to an existing church as an offering to me or to a missionary. Your entire paycheck, just write it out. And by faith, I will provide. And if by faith you know that I will provide, if I'm calling you to this, then do it. This is what it meant maybe for Abel. Abel would bring the very best of his flock and present it to God, knowing that he would not get to eat of this lamb, knowing that he would not get to take this lamb into part of his family or into his mouth to eat and to nourish his body, that he was trusting God would provide for those things, those necessities, and that he would give of the very best of his flock. If you can imagine, it'd be so easy to take the one that's crippled, the lamb that's maybe crippled or ugly or maybe discolored, and to offer that one up instead. Because that one probably doesn't taste as good or it's definitely not as attractive. But Abel brought the very best to God, and he said, "Here, take this. If it means me trusting that you're going to provide, even for the necessities, I trust you can do this." By faith, he consistently offered up the very best of his flock. And he was commended as a righteous man. The word righteous here means holy. He was set apart from the rest of the world by what he did. Yes, Jesus has set us apart, but what are we doing to set ourselves apart out of the things of this world? By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. This man did not die. He did not taste death. God took him up. He was taken up, much like we will see as the church will be when Jesus comes back. He was taken up. He obediently walked with God. Maybe God is asking you to give like Abel, of your time, your talents, your treasure. I think he's calling all of us to do that. Maybe he's asking you to be obedient to God. Speaking of obedience, we'll see this with Noah in just a second. But before he gets to Noah, he throws this verse in there, and I love this. He says, and without faith, if you believe that you are called to live outside of this world, to be set apart, to be walking with Jesus, to keep in step with the Spirit, and to stay on the straight and narrow, then you have to believe. If you have faith, you got to listen to this. He says, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Even if it costs you a full month's paycheck, even if it costs you something, Jesus tells us that he will repay us 100-fold someday. And I love that about God. He is such a faithful God. He is so just. He says, if it costs you something, you don't worry about the here and now. I will give you back 100-fold. Time and time again. And I love this passage. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe, must receive that, must trust that he exists and that he is a rewarder or one who pays wages in full. The Greek word here is apodidomai, which means an employer who pays his employees' wages in full. He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. He's a rewarder of those who earnestly listen to his voice and strive to honor what God has asked him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. This is a theme that we continue to see throughout this chapter, the promises, the heir of the promises that are yet to come. And as we'll see at the end of this chapter, it says none of these men had received what had been promised yet, but only together with us would they be made whole. Only together with us, the church, would everything come to completion and point to Jesus. And the promises would be fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. We'll see that at the end of this chapter. By faith, here he goes again, talking about Abraham. By faith, Abraham, even though he had passed his age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the countless sand on the seashore. In other words, Abraham was so old, so many years had passed. He was about 100 years old when he became a father. But God found him faithful and he blessed him in this way. Verse 13 says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. In other words, they finished this race well. They kept their eyes on the prize, but they looked at the here and now, and they lived out their faith right here, right now. They endured suffering. They endured hardships. They endured the monotonous things of life. They endured all these things, and they kept their faith consistent. And they added to their faith certain things, and they walked out their faith in action. And these things, all these things, it says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country not of their own. If they had been thinking of a country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. I love that. I love how he writes this. I love how the author writes this. He says, God is not ashamed to be called their God, because they proved by their actions how much they loved the Lord. Now listen, I'm not saying that we need to go out of here and do works. Works do not save you. Works are, my best works that I could ever do for the Lord are but filthy rags to Jesus. This is what Scripture tells us. The very best, the very unselfish things that I can offer with my faith, with my life, there's still a selfish motive behind those things. Always. I'm looking around the room to see who's noticing that I'm serving these homeless people at Lubbock Impact. I'm looking around to see who's noticing me get up and get someone a glass of tea yesterday at this thing that we had here for these people, Express Care Church. I mean, there's always something, and even my best works are but filthy rags, because I can never do enough to work my way to heaven. I can never do enough works in this place to please God. I've got to let my faith be what drives me. I've got to let my faith be what drives me to be obedient to God, just like Abraham, just like Noah. Think about that for a second. These two men that we just read about, Noah, out of a holy fear, saw what God was about to do. And he recognized that without God, this is going to be impossible. God, you tell me how to build this ark. I will build it just like you want me to. Because my family matters to me. Because all that matters to me right now is what you think of me, not what these people who are looking at me, mocking me, saying, why are you building a boat? It's never rained before. Why are you building a boat? The sea is so far away. You're building a boat right here on dry land. How are you going to get it there? What kind of truck are you going to use to pull this huge ark to the water? They were mocking him in these ways, I'm sure. But out of a holy and reverent fear, he says, God, I don't care. You're all that matters. You're the one that sustains me. You're the one that gives me life. You're the one that gives me breath. You're the one that gives me food. You're the one that gives me everything that I have. Out of a holy fear, I recognize that without you, I am nothing. And then look at Abraham, who we just read about. He said, God called him from a distant country to go to a land that was not his home. You think about that. Think about how uncomfortable that would be. For you to leave every comfort that you've ever known, your family, your house, your possessions, and to leave and go to a place that you've never been to. This is before the internet. This is before they had pictures. If you can only imagine what kind of fear that must have instilled in his heart at first. I mean, I'm just thinking as a man, when I'm going to a place, I want to know exactly where I'm going. I look it up on the internet. I look it up on Google Maps and I see how long it's going to take me to get there. And I may stop along the way and eat at this restaurant. I want to plan. I want to know these things are coming. But God called him to be uncomfortable. And God called him to leave a land and to leave his comforts and go to a place that was not his own and to be a stranger and alien in that place. In the same way, he's calling us to do that. Out of a holy and reverent fear, he's calling us to be looking to God for everything. And he's also called us to live in this place as strangers and aliens. This place is not our home. We're looking for a greater one, and one that is everlasting, one that is abiding, one that we can hold on to, one that we can have assurance. This is the home that we long for. As you go home for Thanksgiving, I want to challenge you to do this. I want you to go home and not distance yourself from your family, but I want you to look, maybe go to your childhood bedroom, or maybe the bedroom that you lived in before you came to college. And I want you to look at that room and I want you to go, this is not my home. This house is not my home. Go home today. Go to your dorm or your apartment and say, this is not my home. After this semester or after this year, that dorm isn't going to be yours anymore. It's going to be some poor freshman's next year. After your parents move on, or 100 years from now when we're all dead, that house won't be yours anymore. This place, this church, this is what I consider home sometimes. I'm just passing through. We're all just passing through. This place is not our home. If we keep our minds on what is important, if we keep our minds focused on Jesus and just saying, God, where are you calling me right here, right now, this week? God, where are you calling me today? When we have that kind of mindset, out of a holy fear, when we come to God and we say, God, you show me the people I need to talk to. You show me the people that I need to share this faith with, that I need to encourage, that I need to, serve. You ask God that. He'll show you. There's two people in my life. There's several people, actually, that have invested in me, who have great faith, who have been a huge part of discipling me and sharpening me, and even now I still look to them as people that I want to be like. And but let me tell you a story about two people that really encouraged me this past week as I was thinking about them. I was talking to my dad this weekend about a guy that was in Africa. His name is Isa. Isa's a pastor, and this is probably one of the craziest guys you could ever meet. I mean, he's just so solid. He's a solid believer. Isa is my African name, so when I go to Africa, people call me Isa. That means river or Jesus. Take your pick. I don't care. But Isa was a pastor. He's probably 30 years old, maybe 29. He's a young guy. He's a young pastor. And he left his church, he left his family, left his home, and he came and traveled with us for 2 weeks in West Africa. And so I was just talking with him, just picking his brain about what it looks like to be a pastor in Africa. And I said, so why did you come, to translate with us? That's why he was there. He was a translator for us, and we paid him like maybe $200. And that's a lot of money. And I said, so why did you come and translate with us? And he said, well, honestly, the church can't afford to pay me a lot. They pay me very little. And so this is about 2 months' salary, whatever we paid him, I can't remember. And I said, so, well, this is good. You know, you'll have 2 months' salary. You can at least put some of those worries to bed. And he said, no, actually, the people in my church, many of them don't have jobs. Many of them don't have a source of income. And so he says that he has them over. People just show up at his doorstep and they need food. And so he gives everything that he has. Sometimes he says, I go to bed hungry because I don't have any food. And I just go, man, that's crazy. Here's a man that has taken the call to be like Jesus so seriously. Some days he goes without eating so that his people can be physically fed. That's crazy. And I'm so comfortable here in America, in my nice warm bed, you know, in my nice warm house. And it's so easy for us to become comfortable and not live in obedience. I think sometimes, and I'm not trying to diss our American lifestyle at all. I mean, I think Paul said that well when he says, I know what it's like to have plenty, I know what it's like to be in need, but I've learned to be content in every situation, whether I'm well-fed or hungry. I know if I had to go without a meal, I'd be really grumpy. The time that I've had to fast a few times, I was very grumpy on the inside. You know, so for me to go outside of my comfort zone to follow Jesus or to be obedient, that's what radical following of Jesus looks like. To give of yourself so completely that you're looking outwardly consistently. I came back so empowered to be more like Jesus just after spending some time with this man. And he wasn't ever angry or grumpy or anything. He was always had a smile on his face. You ask anybody that's ever gone to Africa with us this past trip, they will tell you, Issa was like Jesus. I mean, it was like walking with Jesus. He looked like Michael Jordan to me, but he was cool, man, I'm telling you. When I think about people that have such strong faith and they don't worry about where their next meal is going to come from, it's so easy for me to go, well, you're used to that lifestyle. Of course, you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. But man, I hope I have that kind of faith. I want to have that kind of faith. I know you want to have that kind of faith. This morning, as I close, we're going to worship here in just a minute. I just want to encourage you to endure with God, and He's going to give you the power and the confidence to do that. And if you are following Him wholeheartedly, completely, He's going to give you what has been promised. You may not see it in this life, you may not see it today, but someday you will. Someday when we all see Jesus face to face, it's all going to be worth it. And so today, as we've heard from God's word, you have an opportunity to respond. You have an opportunity every time God speaks to respond to Him, and today is the day. Today, we have communion on the side. We'll have some of our leaders on the sides to offer you communion. We want to offer this as a time for you to worship God intimately. And so as you go, take the bread, as you take that piece of bread and you dip it into the wine or the juice. It's not wine. We're Baptists for crying out loud. Why would I say wine? Might get fired for that. So dip that into the grape juice. Maybe firm. I don't know. We won't talk about that. Dip that into the juice. Think about this. Think about the cost that has been paid for you. Think about the price that was paid for you. When Jesus took on your sin, He took on your guilt, your shame, your inadequacy, and He died on the cross. He took on your fears, your suffering. He took all that on. And when He passed away on the cross, when He gave up His life, He was broken for you. And He was poured out for you. And He's asking you to do the same thing this morning. So as you take communion, don't take it flippantly. Don't walk over there and just dip it in and eat it. If that's going to be the case, just stay in your seat. Because this is something that's very meaningful. There's nothing magical about this. It's just bread without yeast. It's just grape juice. But at the same time, it means something so much to us. As Jesus was torn for us, as He was broken for us, so we will be broken for Him, just like that bread. Just as he was poured out for us, we will be poured out for him. The reason we use unleavened bread in church like this is because it's bread without yeast. Yeast is an image of sin all through Scripture, and Jesus is that bread without yeast. So as you take that in, you think about what that's calling you to be more like Jesus, to be pure-hearted like Jesus, to be faithful like Jesus, to serve like Jesus, to think like Jesus, to act like Jesus. Put your faith in action this week. If you're not a believer, don't take it. If you're not a follower of Jesus, it's not going to mean anything to you. But if you are, you take that bread, you dip it in, maybe you take it back to your seat and you think about it. You thank God for everything that he's done for you. Take on the call to walk out of here empowered with the mission for here and now. Let's pray.